Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar from the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm Hallie Leinhart, Outreach and Communications Manager at IRP. Our webinar today will explore the important topic of engaging and serving young fathers. We have 4 speakers today who will explore the experiences and needs of young fathers, as well as the practice and policy approaches to strengthen engagement of young fathers and support them with knowledge and skills to help their families thrive. First, we'll hear from Tova Walsh, an associate professor in the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work here at UW-Madison. She is also an IRP affiliate. Next, we'll turn to Raheem Brooks. He's the program director of the CUNY Fatherhood Academy at LaGuardia Community College. Then we'll hear from Justin Hardy, who is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Arizona State University. And finally, we'll hear from Avery Henninger. She is a researcher with Mathematica Policy Research. Thank you all for being here. This webinar is co-produced with the Wisconsin Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board. Please note that the views expressed by our speakers don't necessarily represent the opinions or policies of the Institute for Research on Poverty or any other sponsor, including the UW-Madison. We have an hour today, and after we hear from each of our presenters, we'll spend the last 10 minutes or so at the end for a live Q&A. You can type those in through the Q&A box. We did get quite a few questions submitted as people registered, so we will be queuing up some of those as well. I hope that you'll feel free to participate through the chat, as many of you are. We'd love to know who you are and where you're joining us from. And I want to let you know that we have closed captions enabled, so you can toggle those on and off at the bottom of your screen. We will be posting a recording of the webinar within a day or so, and we will send registrants a link to that recording as well. And so with that, I'm honored to turn it over to Tova Walsh.
Thank you so much, Hallie, and welcome everyone. We are delighted to have so many of you joining us, and it is really fun to get to watch in the chat and get a sense of where you all are coming from. So please keep those introductions coming. I am super thrilled to be joined by 3 terrific colleagues today to talk about engaging and serving young fathers. And also want to let you know that we have recordings of previous webinars posted where we've covered a range of topics from the role of fathers in children's development to fathers' mental health, fathers' involvement in the perinatal period, and so on. And I'll put a link in the chat in just a minute where you can check out recordings of previous webinars, and then this webinar will get added as well if you want to share it with others afterward. But meanwhile, in addition to introducing yourselves as we get going, we'd love to hear questions, comments, ideas, discussion thrown into the chat as well. So thank you all again for joining us. Today, we are going to focus on a particular group of fathers, young fathers, and in part that's motivated by questions that have come during previous webinars where we've talked about a range of topics, and a number of you have added in the chat, what about specifically young fathers, and how can I address this topic in a way that is responsive to their needs? So I've got 3 terrific experts here to join us who will shed light on that from the perspectives of both practitioner and researchers, and offer us some really terrific insight into young fathers broadly and specific groups and contexts, groups of young fathers and contexts that young fathers might experience, different circumstances and unique kind of challenges and resources that might be available to different groups of young fathers. So we are going to get started in just a second here with Raheem Brooks first, who I really want to welcome and thank so much. As you know, as I've said this to him before, I heard him share a story about his work years ago and it stayed with me. So I am really excited that he is joining this webinar today to tell us about his work with CUNY Fatherhood Academy and to share a bit about the program and how it works and the ways in which he serves young fathers in the context of higher education. So Raheem, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, Tova. Thank you, Haley, and thank you for having me. Honored to be here. Honored to be here. Again, I'm Raheem Brooks. I'm the program director for the CUNY Fatherhood Academy at LaGuardia Community College. Our goal is providing young fathers with a clear pathway to earn their high school equivalency diploma, prepare for college, and strengthen their role as fathers. A little bit about myself. I was born in Detroit. And my parents separated, and I was raised by my mom, for the most part, but I had a really great relationship with my dad. Um, and that's despite, his mental health challenges, which eventually led to his incarceration. So when he passed, it definitely left a huge, void for me. Um, but I often ask myself, if the right supports had been in place, could he have lived longer? I ask myself that same question whenever I'm playing with my daughter. Like, I'm like, goodness, Grandpa would have loved you. You know what could have happened? What could have been the intervention to help him? What he was dealing with. That question led me to pursue a career in human services and pursue my master's in social work. I started fatherhood work at East Harlem Employment Services at that time, an organization called Strive. And I was placed in the role of fatherhood initiative manager at that time, which I was able to gain just such a deep understanding of some of the challenges that fathers go through. And you know, these guys just wanted to be the best they could be, but there were challenges that prevented them from realizing those things. Um, I had opportunity to see these gaps in services, how the systems often supported mothers, and rightfully so, but often overlooked fathers. And I got opportunity to see how education and workforce programming could bridge that gap. So working at Strive was a truly incredible experience, and it taught me a lot. And I was really fortunate to learn from uh, leaders in the field. I was about to call him the father of fatherhood, Dr. Ryan Mitzi, who I'm sure some of you are familiar with, Kenneth Braswell, Joe Jones, Jeff Johnson, Sean Dove, Derek Phillips, Scott Leach locally. And a theme kept coming up that, the men that we were working with, these fathers were, they weren't dead beat, they were dead broke. Um, and that thing stuck with me. It gave me that deeper perspective. To we can't judge, our dads. And many of the fathers I worked with at Strive were unemployed, underemployed, over 30, hadn't completed high school, and hadn't had many educational opportunities early in life. So, I wondered like what might be a different in their lives if they had been engaged with earlier, around the time they became fathers. Fortunately for me, in 2012, Mayor Bloomberg in New York administration launched the Young Men's Initiative, which uh, was created to address the needs of young men of color between the ages of 18 and 24. And out of that, the Fatherhood Academy was born, and we launched at LaGuardia Community College, where I'm still at currently. Um, Incredibly honored to be a part of that launch and to be a part of this opportunity to be the program manager and to help launch, two other initiatives as well. And our program offers two tracks. We have a high school equivalency, a GED track, and a college and career prep track. And the majority of the fathers are coming to the program for the GED high school equivalency track. But even beyond that, fathers want to provide for their children and finish what they started. Um, and just be the best dad they could be. Um, a lot of guys come in saying, okay, it's not so much about, they find out later on, it's not just about the educational piece, it's about the community they're building and the cycles that they're breaking. Many of our dads come in, didn't have a great relationship with dad. Some didn't have relationships at all. I remember one of my students early on, he said, I just want to be a cycle breaker. This is a young man that came into the program, a single father, who the mother of his child was murdered in the playground. He was taking ownership of his children and wanted to make sure they had the best life that they could have. And he wanted to be a cycle breaker. So yes, the GED, again, the GED is a huge component. Better job, better opportunities, but it's really about community. So from the beginning, we knew it couldn't just be about academics. Again, it had to be about connection, building connection, culture, and community of care, and building trust before anything. Our intake in itself is more conversational than it is transactional. We don't start with paperwork, we start with the people. We ask about their children, their goals, their fears, what support really look like for them. So trust is like the key, bring consistent contact, texts, emails, phone calls, check-ins, showing up even when they don't sometimes. So we've created a space that's welcoming and affirming, walls filled with photos of fathers and children, images of men of color, and motivational messages that remind them you belong here. Thinking back to our first cohort, our very first, cohort started in like late February 2012, and it was right around the time Trayvon Martin was murdered, tragically. So our plan that week, we were getting things in order. We had this fabulous curriculum that was created by one of our amazing faculty at LaGuardia, and focusing on all the things, curriculums, fatherhood work, focus on values, manhood. But when the fathers arrived that day, it was heavy, you know. Um, Funny enough, one of the brothers came in with a chain around his neck, with a picture of somebody, and I'm like, "Yo, who is that?" And so that's my friend. He just died. I'm wearing this chain to honor him. You know, other and other fathers, began to console him and speak about their own life experience, that the friends that they lost, the violence, and speak about some of the close calls they had. So we knew, at that moment, that the lesson couldn't go as planned, and we had to make space for this pain in the room. And that day, the fathers led a deep conversation about what it means to be Black and or brown in America, about grief, about justice, and their work in society. It was raw, it was honest, but it became one of the most meaningful moments of our program's history. It led us, and taught us that healing and education don't have to be separate. I know Dr. Sean Ginwright. He has done research around shifting from trauma informed care to healing centered engagement. And he says that healing is a collective practice. It happens in community. So to have been a part, it showed us and affirmed that the work that we were doing at the Fatherhood Academy on a community college was incredible. And we helped to create a healing centered space, where dignity and purpose and belonging are restored for some of our guys. And when fathers feel seen and supported in that way, they don't just stay in the program, they transform, they grow. And their families grow. I've been fortunate to be at the program from the beginning. So I've seen fathers graduate, get their GED, move on to college, obtain employment, and then prepare their children or take their children, to their first day of college. It's amazing to behold. I have a staff member on my team now who he's our alumni coordinator. So he's the first person you usually see when a student comes in and sees him, Jesus. And not only did he get his GED, he went on to college and has a bachelor's degree. His brother came to LaGuardia Community College to and enrolled into a GED program where he obtained his GED. And his younger brother is now at the college. He's on the dean's list now, and his son is a junior now in high school, and he's preparing him for where he is going to go. It's pretty incredible. Our graduates just don't move forward. They reach back and, in addition to that, they come back and become mentors for the next group. So our graduates come back to lift the next generation, which, it's pretty amazing to behold. And I think that's the essence of intergenerational change. It's education as legacy, love, leadership, and healing that moves from one generation to the next. So, it's powerful. And I'm just really, really happy to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Raheem. And there is so much that I want to come back to when we get into discussion to ask you a little bit more about kind of how you do these things. Anyway, just I think really inspiring, and I'm seeing lots of comments from folks really appreciating what you've shared about the mentorship and the ways that people are committed to growing the next generation, and how you start with people and invest in that community, not just thinking about it in terms of paperwork and progress toward degree, but the whole holistic thinking about what the fathers you connect with and need from you and need from each other. So thank you, and we'll come back to discuss more. I'm going to invite Justin now, if you want to pull up your slides. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Justin Hardy, who's going to talk with us about the work that he has done that focuses specifically about, young Black fathers in foster care. So now we're going to talk about young fathers' connection to the child welfare system and hear about their experiences. And I'm turning it over to you, Justin. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the invite, and I was super excited to, young fathers, like that is the principal area of my research. So I'm super excited to be able to come to speak with you all today about that. And with that, I have a lot to share. So I really want to kind of just get through these slides, kind of share what I do, my area of work and interest, and get into a discussion, also share some resources with you. But when Raheem mentioned he was from Detroit, I saw a lot of football stuff come up. And I just want to remind my colleagues at Michigan and Wisconsin about the 7-3 Bears. And those that are watching the recording right now will probably laugh at me because the Bears will inevitably mess that up. So I just want to thank you all for being with me today. And I want to just share a little bit about myself to ground the discussion. So I come to this work from several angles that I think in each one uniquely shapes just my understanding of young fatherhood and foster care. So my academic path took me from UIUC, UIC, University of Chicago, born and raised in Chicago. And really, this is where I built the foundation for my research and practice. Before becoming a researcher, I spent a number of years in child welfare, or as a child welfare caseworker, and that's an experience that stays with me and grounds my work today. It taught me how systems look and feel from the inside, and the gaps and just inability to meet fathers generally, but specifically young fathers. And so now my research focuses on young fathers in foster care. And I've come to that work through projects I've worked on called the Cal Youth Study, which is a longitudinal study of youth aging out of the child welfare system in California, and work that I do on Dads Matter, which is modular-based intervention for home visitors to better engage fathers in the home visiting process. So outside of my professional life, I am a father to 3 young daughters, which absolutely tests my fatherhood daily. And I also bring my own lived experience. I was involved in the child welfare system as a youth due to physical abuse from my father against me and my mother, my sisters. And so child welfare and fatherhood, I think, has been a kind of thread that has gone through my life and my research. So I just wanted to ground my research in that. So I just want to start with just a very brief overview of how we understand young Black fathers. And I should have started with that. My research centers on young Black fathers involved in the child welfare system. So when we talk about Black fathers, young Black fathers, it's essential to situate their lives in context. Many become parents while they're trying to finish school or find stable work, while they're trying to build an independent life. But also, trying to obtain employment in labor markets that are largely shaped by racism, low wages, limited opportunities. So even kind of before they hold their baby, they're already struggling to meet, I think, what we would consider to be standards of income, credentials, and access. Yet research consistently shows that young Black fathers have strong desires to be involved. They want to be present. They want to avoid repeating absences that they may have experienced from their fathers. And kind of even without steady money, without kind of against all odds, they still remain deeply connected to caregiving, help with appointments, school involvement, and their involvement also depends on those around them in the relationships. So supportive partners, families of origin, really help expand access and help these young fathers be the fathers that they want to be. But of course, they're also parenting within very restrictive systems that hold expectations of them that are very difficult and challenging to meet. And even despite that, they remain deeply involved. And so kind of within that broader context, let me share with you some research on young fathers in foster care. And so to make that broader connection, I want to highlight that we actually don't know much about young Black fathers that are in foster care. And so when I say in foster care, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I provide services for young fathers who have had their children removed and placed into foster care. But I also work with young fathers that have entered the foster care system as fathers, or have young men who have become fathers while they've been in the foster care system. So these are young guys, ages 18 to 21. And so research generally shows that their experiences are a bit more challenging than their non-parenting foster youth peers. A large share have gotten a female pregnant from ages 19 to 21. But many say that they wanted the pregnancy and hope to build a family. Early fatherhood is often tied to a desire for connection, belonging. But most when young in care who father a child have one baby with one partner, which kind of challenges the assumption that these are young men that are out there getting a bunch of females pregnant. That's not the case that we find in the research among this population. And then once they become fathers, many of them face barriers. They face limited employment, criminal legal justice involvement, unstable housing. And there are certain foster care experiences that we have found to increase the odds of early fatherhood. Things like involvement in kinship care, leaving care early, substance use, mental health challenges, school difficulties. And so these are not unlike their non-foster care peers, except the understanding that these are young men who are trying to father within a very limited system, or a very restrictive system. We'll get into that here in a minute. But I want to talk about theories that guide my work, because I think I was thinking as a practitioner, like what would be some things that would have helped me when I was struggling to meet the needs of young fathers as a foster care caseworker. And so I want to start with responsible fathering framework. So responsible fathering is usually defined through a very specific checklist of behaviors that I've listed here. First, a man is expected to wait to have a baby until he's emotionally and financially ready. And kind of built in the expectation is this idea that he'll become, or that he's already reached stable adult footing, steady income, secure housing, has time to mature, if men and fathers ever do that. But second, he's expected to establish legal paternity when the baby's born. And he's expected to share in the emotional and physical care of the child from pregnancy and onward. But obviously, then the father is a kind of ancillary part of this mother, father, child triad. So not the center of it, kind of on the side. But that clearly, for anyone that's worked with a young father, is highly problematic. So when we talk about responsible fathering, we often use adult-centered checklists that I just explained. But for many young fathers, these expectations don't match where they are in life. They're still in the transition to adulthood. They're trying to finish school, they're trying to find work, secure housing, and being ready can feel impossible when you're 18 or 19 and just getting your first paycheck. So establishing legal paternity also, it looks simple on paper, but for many young men, the limited knowledge of the legal system and especially the profound, deep mistrust of systems, rightfully so, going to court can feel less like protection and more like exposure. So when young fathers fall short of this checklist, it's often not about a lack of love or effort. It's really about a mismatch between what we consider to be expectations that we place on fathers against the reality of that these are young men transitioning to adulthood. And so this transition also includes the transition to school, work, and then when they become young parents, it's kind of all collides. And so with that, I want to share a theory that I use that I think is far more effective in working with young fathers. And so, when we think about young fathers, the conversation has centered on responsible fathering. But I think, and clearly I just demonstrated that the ways that those assumptions may make it hard for young fathers to be fathers. And so I really move towards the resource theory of fatherhood that asks us to start somewhere else. So instead of asking, are you doing enough? This theory asked, what do you actually have to work with? And so this theory says that fathering is shaped by the emotional, social, material resources that a father can draw from in his daily life. And these includes developmental readiness, the quality of relationship with the child's mother, the stability of work and housing. And it reminds us that involvement just isn't about willpower. It's about whether those resources are present and accessible. So when resources are there, involvement is more possible. And I think that when resources are scarce, even highly motivated fathers, also adult fathers, will struggle to meet those expectations. And so I think that this theory is more responsive to young men and young fathers. It doesn't use a checklist of responsibility. It kind of understands that each father comes to fatherhood at a different point in their life, and we shouldn't punish them based on expectations that even adult fathers who are ready to raise a child will experience. And so I pair this with the theory of, it's called the conceptual framework for the transition to adulthood and youth in foster care. I won't go over this theory in detail, but just understand that among youth in foster care, all of these things right here are different resources that the foster care system understands that they have to help support foster youth in obtaining so they can transition to adulthood. And I think that the theories of the resource theory of fathering and the transition to adulthood, youth, and foster care framework really pair well with each other because they both understand that youth will have all different types of preparedness levels, and that's the duty of the state really to provide these youth with those resources. And so I think that they blend well because they both center the role of lived experience of developmental trajectories with how they serve fathers. Okay, so I want to end with some key resources. And I'll go through this quickly because I want to save time for discussion at the end. So I just want to frame this through the lens of the British model of corporate parenting, which our child welfare system in the United States is built on. And it's basically, it goes something like this, that when a state believes that the parents of a child cannot adequately meet their needs or keep them safe, if they can't provide them with the resources to remain safe and free from child maltreatment, that the state steps in to meet those needs. But obviously the state can't parent like we expect, close, nurturing, loving parents to parent. So then they assume that responsibility and then they divide those tasks up among a bunch of other people, foster care workers, child welfare agencies, juvenile or court, and JLs and CASAs. So in this regard, the state has a duty as a corporate parent to make sure that their children, youth in foster care, are being raised in the way that the state thinks that all parents should raise their children. But the state kind of skips out on its role when it comes to um, uh, non-minor dependents in their care who are parenting. And so I just want to remind the state that they have a duty to provide care for young fathers in foster care. And like any reasonable and prudent parent, we would not approach the birth of a child by telling the father that they're not responsible. We would usually meet them with an abundance of resources and support. And I think that the state has to recognize that that is also their duty. But also the state, I would argue, has a role as a corporate grandparent to make sure that children being born to older youth in the state's care also require care that the state needs to provide. Okay, so I want to just share with you some resources. They're linked here. The first one is my dissertation on young fathers in foster care that I will publish at some point. And when I do, your guess is as good as mine, but I need to get on it. So I think this is a good reminder for that. I also conducted a scoping review of 30 years of research on expectant and parenting foster youth with a specific focus on fathers. And so I've linked that here if you want to know more about just the lay of the land with what we know about young fathers in foster care. That'll be a good resource for you too. These next two resources I was a consultant with that focus on understanding fatherhood within child welfare and related constrictive systems. They also created this conversation guide, which I think is an excellent tool for workers wanting to talk to young fathers about their role. And I have a chapter with a colleague of mine, Aaron Manman, on how to engage fathers in child welfare and foster care settings. And the last one is I've done a few webinars and podcasts on young fathers and young Black fathers in the foster care system I've linked here. If you want to watch them or listen to them, those may be helpful as well. Okay. With that, I'll pass it back to Tova.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I don't want to pressure you, but there's a lot of interest in your dissertation in the chat, so you're going to have to get that out to us soon, okay?
Yeah.
I am putting a link in the chat here. If you are not registered, but you joined somehow, please feel free to use that link. Folks are asking a lot about getting the recording and slides sent to them. That will get sent to everyone who registers, and you can still put your info in there if you're concerned about receiving it. So just want you all to know that. With that, we're going to move on to our third presenter. Raheem and Justin, thank you so much. Turning now to Avery, I'm going to invite you to bring up your slides, and we are excited to learn from you about your work on serving young fathers through responsible fatherhood programs.
Great. Thank you so much, Tova. So hello all, my name is Avery Henniger, and I'm here to share findings from a study I led a couple years ago on serving young fathers in responsible fatherhood programs. Before I jump in, just like to preface with a brief disclaimer that the study was conducted as part of the Framing Research Project, which was funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. However, the views expressed in this presentation don't necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, the Administration for Children and Families, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Okay. So responsible fatherhood programs, or RF programs, provide group-based workshops for fathers and father figures focused on parenting, healthy relationships, and economic stability. And while they're for fathers of any age, very few young fathers, which I'll just say here we're very broadly defining as fathers younger than 30, participate in RF programming. However, young fathers are situated to benefit greatly from RF services. They are more likely to still be in regular contact with their children and their child's mother, but often have limited parenting experience, which can make the parenting and relationship supports particularly helpful for this group. Young fathers may also not be as financially secure, kind of as we've talked about in other presentations as well, as older fathers, and so could really benefit from a lot of the employment services that RF programs offer. So given that young fathers potentially have a lot to gain from RF services, but kind of relatively few end up participating, we set out to answer, 3 research questions, which you can see here on the screen. Understanding the characteristics of young fathers, their common challenges, as well as what programs have done to try to address some of these challenges. So to answer these research questions, we reviewed the past 2 decades of research, conducted a descriptive analysis of client characteristics and program participation using survey and service data collected by RF programs, and we also met with program staff and a group of young fathers who were participating in 2 RF programs. So for today, since we have some limited time, I'm really just going to focus on digging into the themes that emerged from the interviews and focus groups that we conducted with the RF programs, which was largely supported by the literature that was reviewed as well. So these themes were grouped into common challenges and solutions related to recruiting young fathers into programming, so kind of getting them to get into the program and sign up, as well as common challenges and solutions to kind of keeping them engaged in the program once they have already joined. If you're interested in reading more about the literature review or that descriptive analysis that we ran, I'll have links to the full white paper and some other resources at the end of the slides that dig into those a little bit deeper. Great. So I'm going to start out by discussing the challenges and solutions to recruiting young fathers. You can see some of the quotes as I go through from the interviews and focus groups that we conducted. So feel free to kind of read through those as I highlight some of the key takeaways. So the first thing we identified was that young fathers can be really difficult to locate through programs' traditional community partners. So program staff noted that young fathers were often not found through any of their existing recruitment networks that they had set up. They were typically more disconnected from kind of community resources or other kind of places in the community, and were just like harder to physically locate and pin down compared to older fathers. In addition, many young fathers also expressed mistrust or kind of disbelief when they learned about the program and what it offers. Fathers' feelings of mistrust or kind of, what you might think of as being system shy, often can stem from negative experiences that they've had in the past with other social services or community organizations that may have let them down in the past. For example, one father talked about feeling really judged during his interactions with the child support system, and that really led him to being skeptical that the fatherhood program would be there to help him. Young men may also be uncomfortable seeking or accepting support from an RF program. So many services for parents are tailored towards mothers and not fathers. And so they really can be unaccustomed to receiving a parenting service that is directed towards them. And that might make it really kind of them really skeptical and make it hard to kind of really get them through the door and sign up for the program. So we identified a few strategies to overcome the challenges programs faced in recruiting young fathers, again, supported by our conversations with programs and the literature. So the first was to embed program staff in the community and recruit from the places, that young people are really frequenting. So a strong community presence can reassure, more hesitant young fathers of the program's commitment and reputation. A few strategies to embed the program in the community include things like, locating the program's office in the same area where outreach is taking place, hiring staff who are from the community themselves, partnering with community agencies that work with the same or similar population, as well as having staff participate in all sorts of community events or things that are happening in the neighborhoods as well, so that they might be some familiar faces for fathers when they come to the program. To recruit young fathers, programs also must really vary their recruitment methods, and it really seemed like this was even more so than, when working with older fathers. Conducting outreach at a whole variety of sites, things like gyms or barbershops or community centers was really critical. And it can also be helpful to use a lot of different methods of communication. So, in person, doing in-person outreach, calling, or texting. Many of the young fathers we spoke to said that they would be very unlikely to even open an email, let alone respond to an email from a program, and would, kind of screen calls or not answer, calls from unknown numbers. So texting really seemed to them to be the best way to get in touch with them. In addition to Reach Young Dads, program recruiters who are program graduates themselves, sometimes called program ambassadors, would be really helpful, especially if they also were young fathers themselves, kind of in prior to their roles in the program. That really seemed to be one of the really effective ways to get dads on board. And finally, staff should ask open-ended questions to learn more about fathers when they're trying to recruit them so that they can really tailor the message to describe how the program can meet their specific needs. So, for example, many dads that we talked to had very unstable housing. So fathers said that getting help from the program staff to get their own apartment made such a difference in their lives, and that was kind of their real primary thing that was helpful. Um, However, program staff also really stressed the importance of not making promises during the recruitment period that they wouldn't be able to deliver once they got into the program. One program staff member said, like they're young guys, they're really hopeful, and if they, you're promising them the moon and you can really not deliver that they get it's very hurtful and very disappointing for them, and makes them even more skeptical and unlikely to kind of continue participating in services if, those promises that were made to them weren't kept. So next, I'm going to discuss some of the common challenges we identified related to engaging young dads in services, so kind of keeping them involved and participating. Again, you can see some of these quotes on the screen. Feel free to read through those as I go through some of the themes. So young fathers often face challenges meeting a lot of their basic needs. Again, similar themes that we've heard in our other presentations today. Things like, again, including not having stable housing or reliable transportation, which can make it just really challenging for them to get to services. So many of the young fathers we spoke to at the programs, they also worked multiple jobs, or they had physically demanding jobs or non-traditional schedules. So sometimes they were just physically too exhausted to come and participate in programming, or were unable to, make a consistent time each week to attend a class. Young fathers are also often trying to really still understand themselves and who they want to be as men, while having this added pressure of, their identity as a father and their role as a parent. So staff who worked with young fathers that were, trying to help them navigate these multiple identities and these shifting identities just noted that it was a different process than working with fathers who were older and more established. So kind of just being open to the fact that this will look different with this group of men. Young fathers' maturity also affect their ability to fully engage in services. So, staff mentioned how many young fathers' brains, they're still developing. It affects their decision making. Even one father that we spoke to, said people his own age, I quote, can barely even sit down for 30 minutes. So he just was really stressing that it's so like the inner motivation that you need to be able to come and attend these workshops that, are often an hour, if not longer at a time, really had to be high and had to come from the fathers themselves. Although the skills that are foundational to any fatherhood program are relevant to many stages of life, the topics that are discussed during workshops can sometimes be and feel less relevant to young fathers. For example, many young fathers have younger children. They have babies and toddlers, so they can't immediately relate to the parenting skills needed for older children. Things like communication or things like that. And fathers also described how they expected the program to really be kind of a typical teacher-student dynamic, and so which really reminded them of kind of negative past experiences, more recent experiences with being in school. So I'm just going to go through these strategies quickly. So we have plenty of time for discussion. But you can see here some strategies that we identified for overcoming engagement challenges, creating that welcoming environment, and everything from the program materials that would appeal to them to offering activities that are kind of focused on young men and the things that they like game nights, offering food, things that would really keep them interested. Another strategy was that one young father said was to really take notes during the workshops, and have them in a place where that he could look back on later when things became more relevant as their children got older. Um, Another strategy was to really adopt this mentorship model between the older and younger fathers so that older fathers can offer young dads the hope and encouragement that their situations really can improve. Um, and then finally, staff also frequently described how young fathers often really needed more intensive case management, like the older fathers, like I mentioned. So one facilitator and case manager said that the older fathers typically came in, they had a specific reason, they maybe even knew kind of what type of job that they were looking for. But the younger dads really had so many more challenges and multiple competing challenges that they were facing. So they just needed more help and more support working through each step. So case management really needs to look different for young dads compared to older fathers participating in the program. That kind of typical case management style that might work for older dads might not apply here. So I'll end here just with a very kind of a few high level takeaways. Involving young fathers in RF programs, while certainly can be challenging, I think that was a theme we heard often. It really is an opportunity to provide this group with the knowledge and skills they need to thrive. So I really, again, really like to think about this as early prevention. If young dads can come in, get the support that they need early, it can really save them from a lot of the challenges that they face later on when things can kind of pile on top of them. So, for example, one dad, I really like this quote, said, we're kids ourselves, we're still young. I feel like we just need this program for guidance to help us before our journey really starts with our kids. So just really encourage programs to continue to seek out a better understanding of how to address young fathers' specific needs, so that more of these fathers can participate in programs and achieve their personal and parenting goals. So again, here's some links to more of the papers that I mentioned that describe this study that you all can take a look at once you have a copy of the slides. So thank you all.
Thank you, Avery. So we're going to dive into some questions and discussion, and I'm excited to do that with you all. And I want to turn to you first, Rahim. And I just want to respond. I see a number of comments in the chat from folks talking about feeling like they're doing their work in a silo or figuring out kind of how to connect with others if you feel like you're being a champion for fathers in these different settings and you're having a hard time finding your people. I wonder if you have any tips as you do fatherhood work in terms of where you find kind of peer support from other professionals or how you connect with folks who kind of share your commitment or find folks to feel a little less isolated in doing this work.
That's a great question. New York has really been, I won't say we're at the forefront, but we do pretty good work, I think, in New York around fatherhood work, just in general. So there's a really big network. We have a fatherhood working group that meets, monthly. So you get an opportunity to connect with other providers and people that are working with dads. I think we're very fortunate internally at the college, to be on a community college. You have opportunity there where there's a wellness center for those that may be going through mental health challenges. There is a space there for called LaGuardia Cares, and then they offer food and emergency assistance and things like that. So it's been really definitely fortunate to have all these other daycares center on campus as well. So just really connecting with internally has been huge. And in addition to that, again, the conversation, the children's cabinet meets. in New York as well. And these are different organizations that, we want to be more father friendly here, not just, parenting programs, but just all programs. So we have conversations on, how can we make that possible? How can we be more, open and responsive to the needs of fathers? So it can be challenging once you put your blinders on and you just really focus on, the work that you do. But it's I'm also fortunate to have colleagues. We were able to expand, so we have two other college campuses, Hostos in the Bronx and Kingsborough Community College, and we often share ideas and try to figure out how can we best support our dads and our communities. So we've been very very fortunate to have that engagement here in the city.
Awesome, thank you. I see at least one person in the chat who kind of noted their community and asked for others who are doing this work. So feel free to use the chat in this way. And I just want to respond to a handful of comments where people were saying that it would be great to have a list for folks who are doing this work, and wanted to say that for the next webinar, which is March 11, we can give you the opportunity to kind of opt into that. So I don't want to share a list of folks who registered for today who haven't given permission to share their contact information, but we'd be glad to kind of create space for that, since I am seeing the eagerness here to connect with others, and we'd like to facilitate that. I am going to open this one up. I'll have you start, Rahim, and turn to others. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you assess a father's need for support when he comes in. You talked about kind of seeing the whole person and being centered on people. When you meet a new dad, how do you get started with this work and start to figure out kind of what he might need from you?
Yeah, sure. We have a 3-tiered approach when we're assessing dads. Father will come in, they attend an orientation, and from there they meet with one of our program counselors, and they have what's called an educational interview to get an understanding of what their strengths are in education, and maybe some of what their weaknesses may be, struggles, and again, it's about understanding the person, not just the student. So we just want to get an idea of what the brothers are coming in with. There's a third part of that phase now that the last part is when a student meets with the program manager, and what he does is he does an individual development plan, which he gets a perspective on. Okay, he may want to know, what do you want for yourself? What do you want for your children? Not just during the program, but years after. And throughout the course of the father's engagement in the program, we refer back to that. We say, okay, you've gotten closer to your goal, or something is getting in the way, perhaps, from helping you to achieve your goal. So we sometimes you have to remind the fathers what they signed up for, what they wanted. This is a voluntary program. So they're all coming in, for a goal. So, as we move through these steps, we just watch closely. We pay attention to how fathers are showing up, how they're feeling, what might be weighing on them. And we don't wait for the crisis. We do our best to just connect and connect them to what they need. They're assigned a program counselor throughout the course of the program. So the counselor is in partnership with the dad to meet his goals. And in addition to that, we have our mentoring component, which I've heard several times, and these are fathers that come back to the program, and through our Black Male Initiative, CUNY Black Male Initiative is a program that helps to support Black and Hispanic males graduate at greater rates, and they fund us for our mentoring component, which helps guys graduate the program, they enter into the college, and they mentor the next generation. So that's been incredibly. The mentors often find out things that the counselor may not find out in some cases, which is interesting. But as a team, we all collaborate and make sure that we're doing our best to assist the father and meet them where they are.
Thank you. So there are so many great questions coming in here. So I wish we had time for all of them. But Justin, one that I am going to turn to you with, there have been a couple of questions in the chat and in the Q&A box and in advance as well, related to thinking about the framing of responsible fatherhood programs and how that rings in the ears of fathers who hear it. And you spoke to that a little bit when you talked about resource theory, I think, in terms of that kind of reframe. Can you talk a little bit about, how you think fathers might hear responsible fatherhood, and any thoughts you have about kind of how we message that and what it means to dads to hear that?
Yeah, I'm pretty critical of responsible fathering, but I don't think it's bad. I don't. So the only issue I take is with that first one, that a father waits to make a baby until they're ready. I mean, anyone that's a father knows they'll never be ready. And for Black populations, it feels a little bit eugenic-y. Like, we don't provide Black families and families of color with resources to meet their own needs, let alone children. And so to have that expectation, I think is totally off center. But the other ones, I think they're fair expectations that we have of fathers at some point, that they need to step up and do those things. But when we only treat them as expectations without some response around how we can support them to do it, that's what I take issue with. And so, but also, those three other things, there are only three other dimensions of 100 dimensions of fatherhood. There's things that we need to help fathers with in terms of like nurturance and supporting moms that I think are important. And so I think that any conversation we have around that, it has to be matched with the conversation around how are we providing you with the resources to do it, but also like, what are your needs and desires as a father? And so I think we need to incorporate them. So I don't want to throw out responsible fathering, period. I think it's important, but we have to understand that to not provide them with the tools to do it, then we're just setting them up for failure and then just pushing programs that have unrealistic expectations.
Thank you, Justin. Avery, did that come up at all in your work? How did that come up in the research you've done around responsible fatherhood programs?
Yeah, it comes up often. And I think when talking to programs about it specifically, these are programs that are funded to receive a responsible fatherhood grant from the Office of Family Assistance. It's the name of the grant, but oftentimes they have their own names for their program, and that's what they lead with when talking to fathers. They have developed kind of a program identity, and that is, aligns with the goals of responsible fatherhood, but they're not using those terms. Just kind of as you kind of noted, like, it can be a little off-putting and can feel very much like fathers don't want to participate in something like from the beginning if they think like, oh, I'm supposed to be, responsible or something like that. So I think it's really, when talking with dads about programming, it's really leading with what you're offering, what the program is offering, leading with how they're supporting fathers, how they work with fathers, and developing kind of the own program identity and culture, and really kind of making sure that kind of putting that out first rather than starting with the terms that might be, like I said, off-putting to dads and make them not want to participate.
Can I just say one last thing regarding responsible fathering? Is that it steps in at a one point in time in a father's lived experience. There's a lot that we have to do to prepare fathers in the expectancy stage that responsible fathering doesn't really account for. And also, I do a lot of work with fathers around like the long game of fathering, like thinking about like when do you want to become a father, and then once you're a father, like thinking about like how to save up for your child's college fund and things like that. And so I think that's important dimensions that responsible fathering misses. But also, we have to acknowledge that if we expect fathers to be responsible financially, when young fathers are forced to engage in the informal economy, that we cannot punish them for engaging in the informal economy to be responsible fathers when there's no jobs for them to be able to financially prepare for their kids. And so I think that we have to distinguish that as well.
Thank you. So I know we're coming up on the end of our time, and I see Hallie here to remind us. Thank you. I do want to flag, I put it in the chat that March 11 will be the next webinar in this series, and we're going to focus on supporting fathers and their families surrounding separation. So thinking about a variety of contexts, whether it's child welfare involvement, whether it's a parent's incarceration, whether it's it's just related to immigration, any number of reasons that there might be periods of separation. That'll be the next topic. Thank you all so much. I'm gonna turn it back to Hallie.
Thank you. Thanks so much to our presenters for these very thoughtful presentations today. Thanks so much to Tova for hosting. And thanks to the audience for taking time out of your day and participating, and such thoughtful participation too, I might add. Just a reminder that we will be posting the recording of the webinar within a day or so, and you'll receive a link if you registered for this webinar via your email. And with that, we'll close out and have an excellent rest of your day and week.